Morning, Nolan Coiner. Another episode of The Breakup, a show where we look at our relationship with money and sort of follow using predictions where that relationship, the psychology around that relationship with the US dollar will lead us, and contrast it with where the psychology propelling an economy based on Bitcoin will lead us. Today, the subject, so we take, various news stories in the day and then put this filter on it, put the filter of fiat standards, so US dollar perpetuating basically all global commercial relationships, and contrasting that with Bitcoin and what a psychological engine behind an economy based on a Bitcoin standard, where that would lead us. Today, we're going to be looking at Julian Assange. It's a really big story and really goes to the start of Bitcoin in some ways. And I'll say this. When Julian Assange was still sitting in that Colombian embassy in London in 2017 and Bitcoin realized quite a large spike in price, Julian Assange cited my old business, CoinDesk, and used a screenshot of the CoinDesk Bitcoin price index, which was the biggest price index at the time, something that I had a little bit of involvement with. And he tweeted out and said, "Thank you for putting me in here and forcing me to use Bitcoin many years ago. I've done quite well with it. So congratulations to Julian Assange for doing well on Bitcoin." And but that's not really going to help him with where he's sitting right now. He could have all the Bitcoin in the world and he'd be as fucked as any of us. It doesn't matter how much he has. What he's just gone through, I think, has put a real sad frame on all journalists and left everyone a little bit vulnerable, and I'll explain why. So yesterday, the UK courts decided to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. The reason they were able to do that is because of a law passed in the United States in about 2014, generally referred to as the Assange Clause. And the Assange Clause basically defines who a journalist is and who gets protections. The journalistic protections that are in the First Amendment in the United States, and then that have been practiced for many years now, and have been vital to the U.S. perpetuating its superpower status. But with what happened with Assange in 2014, when they changed the law, they made the definition of a journalist literally an employee of one of these major media companies. If you're not an employee, you have to have a certain track record, a certain amount of years as a citizen independent journalist in order to be qualified for these protections. Maybe I can understand why they did this, but take a look at the context now. In an era of citizen journalism being empowered by technology, the law has not really come and met that advancement, right? So it hasn't met anyone halfway. You have all these tools that allow citizen journalists to operate, monetize, avoid publishers and things like that. But the definition remains, did you get a job, right? Did you get a job? And because he didn't have a job, basically the UK courts were, well, the US law and this and that, and they've decided to extradite him. Now, that definition has a lot of problems, right? It has a lot of problems. If you're allowing the government to define who a journalist is, you're really exposing all journalists to the faith and credit of the United States. They have to make the right choice, right? And that's literally impossible. A better definition would be to look at who's threatening that journalist, right? Do they have, so it's almost like a definition by inverse, right? So it's not so much are they a journalist or not. You flip it and say, are they suffering from the threats that are typical to journalists? And therefore, you can start to understand what a journalist is if you really just take a tally of the threats. We can take a look at these threats, violent groups, right? So if Antifa is against you, or if any one of these domestic terrorist groups that we hear about in the United States is after you, you're definitely threatened. Media owners, right? Are media owners. So the very media companies that lend to the definition, that can bestow the definition of on you, can actually attack you. So in the case of media outlets, in Assange, it's been both sides of the aisles, the Fox Newses and the CNNs. Now, Tucker Carlson on Fox News has been supporting Assange's case, of course. So that's one voice. But in general, Fox News is certainly not taking a strong position, especially the news folks, the guys who just read the news. are reading the news as it comes out, and seem to be lining up with what you hear on MSNBC and CNN, right? So it sounds like the same story. Security and intelligence forces. I mean, that's a no-brainer when it comes to Assange. Of course, security and intelligence forces are attacking him and threatening him in this case. The NSA has been on record and has constant talking heads going on television. These very media companies telling everyone he's not a journalist, and he's done crimes, threatened American agents, and uncovered who secret spies were that were helping America and all this kind of thing. That's what they say. Judges, right? Are judges threatening the journalist? Well, in this case, we've got enough judges that seem to be applying the sub-constitutional law, right? So the laws that come under the Constitution are still subject to constitutional approval, let's say. They have to be in line with the Constitution. So if the judges are applying laws without any constitutional context, they might just be, choosing which laws are useful to them and not. So I don't really want to get into the full legal piece here about judges threatening him. All I can say is a judge is extraditing him. A judge didn't give him permission to use this defense of being a citizen journalist. So that's a problem. Heads of state. Are any heads of state threatening Assange? Yeah, many, right? Many. And it was all sides, right? It was Obama, it's Biden now. In the case of Trump, I don't know if he was really threatening Assange so much, but he certainly made sure he was arrested, and then, did a thing that I think most people who were Trump supporters like myself, I supported Trump because he was bringing the chaos that a Bitcoiner like me loved, right? Like, here's a way to understand my support of Trump. I love Trump, but I love Biden even more, right? It's much better than Trump. Trump was great in term one, but Biden term, one is just the best, right? Couldn't be better. Because I love Bitcoin, right? Like, I don't want these people to be successful necessarily, right? My side of it's the other side. I've already broken up, right? I'm here to help you break up, because I do think this relationship piece is really what it's about. You've got to understand that the thing you're in a relationship with, you can even anthropomorphize it, like the person, the entity you're in a relationship. In this case, your partner, the money, right? That you have we all do have a very deep psychological relationship with money, right? It's a major part of how we think. If that relationship is super unhealthy, right, things aren't going to turn out so well. And in this case, with what Trump did, right, in the end, with what Trump did, by not pardoning him, he lost people like me that believed he was here to cause some chaos, and were really happy with the chaos that was caused. But in the end, some of the words about being on the side of the individual just didn't come through, because to me it was a no-brainer that he should have pardoned Assange and Snowden and anyone else involved in that whole era. Because if it's true what Trump is saying, the election was rigged and he could probably use the help of Snowden and Assange, because they have sort of similar enemies, right? So, but it wasn't done. So heads of state certainly threatening Assange. Many, some supporting him. You get that. Paid trolls, right? So not quite just like trolls, but are there people being paid out there to go and spread misinformation? I don't have any proof in the case of Assange, but I can imagine those things are around there. But nevertheless, it's not to prove that Assange has all of these threats. It's to show that this is probably a better definition of who requires journalistic protections, by looking at the threats that are actually lining up. So if the threats are there, it doesn't really matter, as far as I can tell, what's being said, because we're not here to police what people are saying, right? That's the freedom of speech part. But if they're feeling these threats, they should certainly have the protections of a journalist that are shared, with folks like Jim Acosta. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is contrast Jim Acosta. So Jim Acosta is a CNN journalist, and he's often called enemy of the people by Trump. And he wrote a book called Enemy of the People. So you've got Assange here, who's being called an enemy of the state, and you've got Acosta here being called enemy of the people. So these are the two sides of journalistic integrity, or journalistic protection, that we've got to look at, right? It's not just, do we protect the journalists? Like I said, it's the threats they're facing, right? So the journalist is facing threats. It doesn't really matter if you're an employee or not. Like, this is how useless the definition is, right? Completely useless. In the case of Acosta, he is an employee, but does he have all of these threats? Are there violent groups threatening him? I think so. Yeah, I'd say that there are people that are so far on the Trump side that hate Jim Acosta so much that he is certainly under a threat. So I'll give him that one. Are there media owners threatening him? Well, there's Fox. But are they threatening him? I find the only thing I actually watch on mainstream media, I watch CNN for the laughs, right? I watch it because I think it's pretty funny. Fox as well, it's quite funny, right? The stuff they come up with is insane usually, and you could have a chuckle, right? Like, what are they talking about today? Da, 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 da. One of the stories that I do follow is this little battle they have between Fox and CNN, and they have no ratings, and the line they had about Chris Cuomo and Fox the other day when he was terminated. CNN loses its only star. Its only star. They don't call them journalists; they call them stars and talent and things like that. And they lose their only star. So the back and forth is really funny, right? So I don't pay attention to anything that Fox or CNN do, but when I get these back and forth fights, I pay attention. So Acosta, I think, falls into that. He's attacked by Fox News, but in the same way that they attack Chris Cuomo. It's like, you're a bit dumb, it's fake news, blah, blah, blah. Is it an attack? It's one side. It's a bit of the sport. It's a bit like wrestling, right? So I don't know if it's an attack in so much as it's wrestling. So I'm not going to give him that one. Security and intelligence, I don't think so. Is the NSA got a problem with Jim Acosta? I haven't heard anything about it. Maybe. I could be wrong. I have no proof. Are judges after Jim Acosta? I don't think so. I haven't heard of that. Are any heads of state? Trump, certainly. Certainly Trump disliked Acosta. But here's the thing that Trump did. Trump spoke with him every day. Trump called on him every day. Trump didn't have to call him. Sometimes he said, whoa, little Jim, quiet, or whatever he said. But I mean, was he attacked? Well, Jim Acosta was treated like a hero because for a couple of days, Trump kicked him out of the journalists' little press pool that followed Trump around. And that was treated like he was in a Colombian embassy and was fighting for his life and extradition to the United States to face a tribunal, a star chamber from Trump. I mean, it really was taken that far. In the end, he was told he's so rude and such a waste of everyone's time that you got to take a few days off from the press pool. And that was treated the equivalent of extradite him so we can try him for war crimes and stuff like that. Like, really crazy. Paid trolls, are there paid trolls after Acosta? Yeah, I mean, there have to be. I don't have any proof. So where does Acosta come in? He's got the violent groups a little bit. Yeah, I'll give him that. And security intelligence, no. Judges, no. Media owners, not really. He's got the paid trolls, yeah. And head of state. Yeah, maybe head of state. But like I said, this was not the same as jail, right? He criticized him for being stupid. That's fair game, I think. So I'm not going to give him the heads of state. I just can't. But I will give him the violent groups and paid trolls. So he certainly requires some protection, right? He certainly requires protection. My point is not to say that Jim Acosta is not threatened. My point is not even to say he's not a journalist. I suppose he is. I don't treat him like one in the sense that I don't rely on him for information, but there's very few journalists I actually do that for. So that's not a standard at all, right? And it shouldn't, I'm not arguing it for it to be a standard. I'm saying, despite me not recognizing him as a very good journalist, he's a journalist and does deserve the protections, right? Now, most of Acosta's trouble actually ends up coming from people, right? It's not really any state actors that are giving him trouble, right? I wouldn't say it's any state actors giving Jim Acosta trouble other than Trump. So in the end, Jim Acosta is not really speaking truth to power so much as he's triggering people, right? And that's why the people are after him. Are they paid? Are they part of some group? I think sometimes. I think, yeah, probably. But it's probably pretty organic too. I don't think you need to pay a troll to go after Jim Acosta. I think there's enough people that just hate him as it is, right? Now, in the case of Assange, right? So Jim Acosta is certainly not an enemy of the state, right? He's not an enemy of the state, right? Enemy of the people, yeah, some people hate him. And that's enough to get your journalistic protections, right? I think that's enough to get your journalistic protections. But in the case of Assange, it was both political parties, multiple governments, entire divisions of the security services, and all of this is possible because of confidence in the full faith and credit of the US system, right? The full faith and credit in the dollar, the full faith and credit in the system to pass a law that literally defines what a journalist is and isn't. That's the problem, right? So in the end, the system itself defined what a journalist is and omitted the enemy of the state part, right? There is no enemy of the state, right? You can't be the enemy of the state and be considered a journalist if you have a job, if you don't have a job, right? If you're not paid by CNN and Fox. So in the end, right, the message for today and why we need to break up is this is not going to get solved, right? This has to do with the money in the end, right? The US political system is so filled with special interests and a certain amount of corruption that we can't have full faith and credit that decisions are made by the judiciary in this case to handle Assange correctly, right? Acosta is treated as a someone who needs protections, right? I don't really think he does. He needs them against people. He's certainly threatened. I would say he's threatened, but I don't think he needs them against any government entity around the world. But Assange does, right? So if you take the US definition, you omit anyone who's using Substack as a journalistic broadcast distribution tool. All of these people now that are using the internet to leverage the distribution capacity and spread their message around don't have these protections, right? So none of these people can actually speak truth to power in the end because they don't fit the definition. And in the end, it doesn't really matter who's threatening you, right? Which is what the definition in the end should be. It should just be who's threatening you, and is it the collection of folks that we would recognize as the typical entities that come out and threaten a journalist. The truth to power thing, if you're speaking truth to power, these pieces of power coordinate, orchestrate to get you, right? And in the case of Assange, that's what's happened, right? So the lesson today is not a political party that's going to save you from this, right? It's not even the laws that redefine who a journalist is yet that's going to do it. In the end, it's about breaking up with media outlets, right? So you can't watch the news. It's all garbage, right? It's not on your side. Definitely, can't do a lot of this stuff. And it's probably not going to get solved, right? So that's the prediction for this episode. The amount of let's call it, what's that, entropy, the amount of rot that is set into the system is probably so far along, at least it is in my prediction, that we can't solve it. We need a wholesale restart, right? And that doesn't mean changing laws about political finance, doesn't mean any of those things, right? It means literally taking the money out of the system and having a new money. It's just about breaking up, right? We can't fix it. It's unfixable. It's unfixable, right? The only way to get over it is to kind of start again. And we can start again with a new money. And that's why people are so into Bitcoin, right? That's why we don't think about trading Bitcoin ever for dollars, right? That'll never happen. You have to trade it for dollars to pay some bills from time to time. But when people ask me, when are you going to trade? When are you going to cash out? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Buying Bitcoin is about building a new system that will protect journalists, because it won't rely on a judicial and political system that is completely corrupted by the old money and the spirit of the old money and the relationships all kinds of people have with that money, right? So it's a new relationship with money, a new spirit inside the money, and the relationships that will be formed because of the spirit of that money lead us to a place where you can have enemies of the state who are considered journalists, even if they don't have a job, right? And that's where we need to be. That's everything for today, everyone. Thanks.